Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined with my co-host, Chris Crawford. Thank you for listening in to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Crawford.
Hello.
And we are joined by special guest, Stanley Buzek. But Stanley, for the record, we were talking earlier before the podcast and everything started, and your name originates from a Czech origin. Can you actually pronounce what your last name is supposed to sound like?
Yeah, it's supposed to sound like Buzek, and you've got to pretty much. It's kind of like being a native speaker. If you're not a native speaker, it's just hard to do. So I usually don't. I just tell people that it's like music, but with a B, and it just makes it easier for everybody.
I have the same problem with Lawvere. I can't tell you how many times I've had like Lawrence or Laverne, and I'm like Laverne and Shirley. I don't get it, but the interesting part about your Czech background is I don't think a lot of the nation recognizes how closely related Czech culture is with Texas culture. And for like country music fans, West Texas and places like that are often mentioned. But, you have like the Kolachi culture in West Texas. Everybody on I-35 as they're going through West has to stop at the Czech stop or Slovačeks. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, like your origins with your Czech culture and how you grew up and everything and how that influences you today.
Well, yeah, the Czech culture, a lot of it is in or around West Texas, which everybody knows is close to the Waco area. But really, the biggest part of the Czech infrastructure started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and more around LaGrange, Ellinger, Columbus, down to El Campo, that way. My grandfather came over in, I think it was 1890, 1891, something like that. My grandmother came over in 1906. They actually came in wooden sailing ships into the port of Galveston and then took ox carts to the Ellinger, LaGrange area where they settled at the beginning. And um, then my grandmother and grandfather moved to south of Rosenberg and sharecropped out there where my dad and my uncles were all born and raised there. And so really I am only second generation American. We're fully ingrained in the Czech culture.
That's really exciting. So do you often scoff at people who refer to kolaches for anything that is dough shaped like a sausage roll or a fruit kolache?
No, that's sometimes I just giggle. I remember my grandmother making a kolache and klobasics, and when I was a kid. But yeah, anymore, if it's a piece of dough with some fruit on it or even a sausage wrap, it's a kolache. And yeah, sometimes you just shake your head, but there's nothing you can do.
I don't know if it's because I'm from Mississippi and not Texas, but I have no idea what y'all are talking about. I'm thinking of a burrito.
Oh yeah, there you go. Well, a kolache, kolach is usually they make them in a big pan. It's all squares of dough, and they have either different fruit fillings or cream cheese or something like that in the
Okay.
center of them. It's a pastry. It's a heavy bread sweet pastry. And but now it's been kind of co-opted, and they call kolaches and we call them klobasniks. it's a piece of sausage wrapped in the same dough and baked. So it's a whole pastry type thing. It's like
Okay.
it's a Czech donut.
Yeah. So, Chris, Texas 101, kolaches, and that other thing. I can't even pronounce, but maybe it's because I was originally from Pennsylvania, so a Yankee in the South.
Yeah, and everybody says kolachis, and it's not and that's a little bit from the I think the Hispanic little bit of part of it, but it's actually a kolach is the way you say it, and there is really no plural. It's either one or a bunch. It's still a kolach.
That's that's really interesting. So, kind of on that note, talk a little bit about your life outside of knives. So, I mean, I know that you covered a little bit about your ancestry and immigration, but what if our listeners want to know about Stanley the person, not just Stanley the knife maker? Where does that start at?
Um, I guess Stanley the person is to show how stubborn I can be at times. I was raised a lot by my grandmother and grandfather, and on my dad's side, and they were of Czech origin. So I learned and spoke a lot of Czech when I was a young kid, and we moved away from Rosenberg into Houston, and I started elementary school, first grade, and I uh, about the first about 3 or 4 or 5 days into school, my mother gets a call, uh, and they go, "Does this boy speak English?" And she goes, "Yes, he speaks English very well." And she goes, "Well, not here at school." And when I got home that day, I realized that from then on I would speak English very well at school. So um, that was, and so I've always been kind of hard headed and outside the box. And but most of my life I spent as a truck driver, and for 38 years, I sat behind the steering wheel and run up and down the road all over the country. Um, Stumbled into knife making in my late 40s. I mean, I only started knife making in 2003. So I'm going on 20 years this year. But truck driver, got a couple of fine daughters, few grandkids, and um, just now I live on a small working ranch with some of my wife's kinfolks, and that's what we do now.
So, uh, can you talk a little bit about how you got into knives? Like, what was your first impression with knives? I read a little bit on your website about your origin stories and knives as a kid, but I think it'd probably be better for our listeners if they heard it from
Oh,
you.
okay. Well, there again, we kind of goes back to my grandmother and my grandfather. My uh, Three of my dad's brothers were all in World War II, and two of them were in the Navy, and they were stationed in the Navy in the South Pacific, and so one of my uncles made a what everybody considers a theater knife, and and I can remember from the time I was small is my grandmother using he when he got out of the Navy, he came back to Texas for a while, and he gave that knife to my grandmother. And my grandmother used that knife in her kitchen from the time I was big enough to remember, up until she passed away, and then the knife came to me. I still have the knife today. So I've always been a knife nut. My dad bought me my first pocket knife. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and it was one of those little red handled Barlows that you see on every cardboard uh, placard in a in every hardware store that you ever walked into. And I carried that knife till I turned the blades into shoestrings. So I've always been a knife nut. But then I I was actually in Abilene, Texas, and there was a guy set up there with a grinder and a set of paper wheels, and he was sharpening knives, and I had him sharpen my knife, and he did a pretty good job. And so um, at that time I was just carrying just a standard case trapper and or a buck 301 Stockman. And so I kind of put two and two together, and I go, well, if he's got these paper wheels, somebody's bound to sell them. And I found Texas Knife Makers Supply. And so I called them up and said, hey, y'all have these paper wheels for sharpening knives? And they go, yeah, we do. And I go, cool. I'll be down there in a little bit. I was only about 35, 40 minutes away from them. Well, I walked in the store that day, and it was all downhill from there. I think I spent a couple of $100 that day in kits and handle material and various things, just going for a set of paper. Oh, and I did get the paper wheels, and so that's where it started. And I started out putting kits together, put maybe a dozen, maybe 18 kits together, something like that, and then figured out, well, I can grind my own blade, and so I started there, and it's just grown and grown exponentially since. I've gone from passion to obsession, if you want to put it that way.
Hey, Stanley, you mentioned that your grandfather had made that theater knife, and what first came to my mind was like a prop knife, but then you said your grandmother used it in the kitchen. Can you explain what you meant by a theater knife?
Ah, yes, and it was actually one of my uncles, not my grandfather. It was
Oh,
one of my
sorry,
uncles that
uncle.
made the theater knife while they were stationed. Well, that's right. While they were both on a both. Come on, mouth. They were both on an aircraft carrier in the South Pacific. And so he made the theater, what people call theater knives. There were tons of them made during World War II when the guys didn't have anything else to do. They'd make knives, and so they called theater knives because you had some that were made in the European theater, you had some that were
Ah,
made in the African theater, you had some that were made in the Italian theater, or you had in South Pacific, the South Pacific theater. So the general, those handmade knives of the troops from World War II are all called theater knives. And so that's where
gotcha.
that came about.
Okay.
And actually, the theater knife that I have was the blade was a bandsaw blade out of the machine shop. Brass and aluminum was scavenged off of old landing gears when the planes would hit the deck too hard and bend and break stuff. They scavenged up the aluminum, and the handle material is actually fighter canopies. Some of the earliest Lexan and plexiglass, and used for the handle material. So that's where I got my theater. That's where theater knives come from.
So you have this theater knife and early, slip joints and pocket knives as a background for experience. How does that play a role into the knives that you make today? Is there anything specifically about those experiences that you had as a kid, or getting into knives originally, that interested you the most or plays a role in the kind of blades that you make?
Uh, I guess from the culture I came from, everybody carried a pocket knife, even all through high school. My high school years, if you'd gone through the high school, and every guy in the high school was probably not probably would have a pocket knife in their pocket, and probably 80% of the girls would have one in their purse, because we were raised in a farm culture. I was raised in a town called Waller, and a lot of that was farming and everything else. So and ranching and that. So everybody carried a pocket knife. Um, I When I got started making knives, I started out, like most everybody, with fixed blades, and I made several fixed blades, and I made several liner locks and frame locks and stuff when I got into making folders. And then when I made my first, what I would consider traditional folders, slip joint folders, it's like, this is what I want to do. This is and so all of my stuff now is pretty much based on traditional patterns, trappers, stockmans, Texas jacks, like that. And that's a lot of that was from my high school days. 'Cause everybody either carried a stockman or a two blade trapper. I mean, that was just the knives of the day.
So, when it comes to pattern sourcing, like what's your influence with other makers, or how you collected your patterns or things like that? Can you talk a little bit about how exactly you got into building like what I would consider a traditional Texas style two blade trapper?
Yeah, yeah. That's of course the trapper was just, and so the first one I made on my own, and back then there was the old TKCA, Texas Knife Maker Collectors Association, and uh, Bill Ripple, big part of it, and um, I handed it to him and had him look at it, and and he said, "It opens, it closes, it works." He said, "You got the hardest part down," and he said, "Now the rest of it is aesthetics." But there's one thing about the traditional knife maker group is, we the traditional iPad has been around since, since when, back in Sheffield, England, back in the 1800s. And so we're really not copying everything, but everybody creates their own style. Um, me, you, one of mine, several of the other makers. If you stack five of our trappers together, a lot of them, you could go, okay, that's Ruppel's, that's that's um, Bobby House, that's uh, Tim Robertson. You can just go down like, because everybody's got enough of their own style that it just shows, even though they all look similar. And but I'm just enamored with traditional patterns, and the good thing about the makers is we all share patterns. I can I call one of the other makers up and go, "Hey, I saw this knife you posted today, and I really like that. Would you let me use that pattern?" And sure. And as a matter of fact, one of the patterns I build a lot of today, I call my RH trapper. It's a little 3 5/8 closed length trapper, two blade trapper, and Raymond Hunt uh, designed it. And I asked Raymond one day, I said, "Hey Raymond, would you be willing to share that pattern with me?" And he goes, "Sure." He said, "As soon as we get home from the show," he said, I'll send you the pattern." And we do that all the time. And that's the greatest thing about a lot of the traditional makers is there's not a whole lot of secrets about patterns and stuff. We exchange them readily.
That's really cool. Um, when you're doing kind of related to how Chris and I know you, um, you use a pantograph today to inlay all your shields, correct?
I do now, yes. Yes. I do use a pantograph now.
How long had you been doing shield inlays before that, before using a pantograph, and what was your technique for that?
Oh, actually, I've only had my pantograph maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, something like that. I haven't had my pantograph long. I actually started out doing it the old way with parser plates. I would buy pre-cut shields and use a parser plate. And a parser plate is the negative of the shield, and you put it on, you place that parser, what they call parser plate, on top of your handle material, and then you use some kind of cutting tool. I use my mill with cutters, and you would route out all where the shield would end, and then the shield would inset in it. So, but now, I use my pantograph. I cut my own shields, and I inset them with the pantograph. But the parser plate was actually the way it was done, even back to the old Sheffield houses in England.
Yeah, my first few shield inlays were using parser plates too. I forget exactly where I got them from, but I think I still have them in a drawer. But I quickly, uh, funny story. Uh, Chris and I had been talking a little bit back in 2019 when I was starting to get into pocket knives after I'd kind of been dabbling in fixed blades for a while. And I was asking him about pantographs, and he turned me on to talking with Tim Robertson. And I was able to to actually get uh, one of his pantographs that he was refurbishing, and so that sits in my shop as my primary. But after that, after that introduction, I started buying the templates and everything from Chris, and so that's how somehow we got to be more acquainted with each other. But it's kind of it's funny how the circle is pretty small on pantographs, but how interconnected a lot of us are with Chris Crawford and what he does with the templates.
Oh, sure. I get most all of my templates from Chris.
Well, I appreciate that. You saying that. I know it's one thing that's given me a chance to get to know some of the people who I might not would have gotten to know otherwise, just because, they'll contact me about templates, and, I'll have interaction with them. And then I got to go to Blade for the first time. Never been before. Got to go for the first time last year. And I was able to walk around and meet some of the people face to face that I'd, been doing business with. So that was, Aaron, you talk about, it was kind of what got us knowing each other more. But, that's really been a advantage for me, is just getting to know other makers as well that I might not would have, come across or have cross contact with. So.
Yeah, it's amazing the camaraderie, that the knife makers share. That um, we see each other. We don't see each other. We talk to each other a lot, and then we see each other at shows. And actually, Chris, Blade last year was my first time doing actual Blade Atlanta. Was as far as doing it for that show. I'd always done all the local shows here, and what ICCE and used to be the Texas Knife Makers Collectors shows and stuff like that. But last year was my first actual going to Blade Atlanta.
Okay, yeah, I just went as a visitor and walked around. I think Derek Melton and I went. We went together on Thursday. I guess it was Friday and Saturday is when we were in there. But we're both getting us a table this year, and found out just this week that we're able to get our table side by side. And so, if you're back this year, Stanley, I'd look forward to getting to meet you face to face.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, I sure would. Yeah, I look forward to it. Yeah, I'm on row 13, table E, and uh, I was very lucky that was able to get a table this last year, and started my uh, trip with Blade Atlanta.
Yeah, we were. I was kind of concerned if I'd end up getting in that secondary room, but I think mine's going to be, it's like row 9, U, and I think Derek's is 9V. So we won't be too far from each other actually then.
Yeah, we'll be real close right there, because that's where that row 12 and 13. There's a whole lot of the slip joint makers are all right there. Uh, uh,
Okay.
Bill's there. Um, God, my mind is just locked up. Luke, Luke Swinson, Luke
Hmm.
and Bill and Johnny Stout and Bobby House and the whole all the slip joint cartel are all pretty much right there together. And I was real lucky to get in a table that was that close to them.
Yeah. Unless everybody spends all their money before they
And
get to you.
yeah, it's yeah, that's this is true too. And
Maybe.
a little bit funny, a little bit funny story about Blade shows is Blade Texas last year. We'd gone to the guild meeting that morning, and this Friday morning, and before the show opened, and we had the guild meeting, and we were in the guild meeting, and we come out, and I was talking to Luke, and of course, the line was all the way back down. You couldn't even see the other end of it, and down the hallway there, going in, and we were headed back into the room, and I told Luke, I said, man, I said, okay, conventions. I said, this is looks like it's gonna be a good show. I mean, it's gonna be great. A lot of people. And he looked down there and he goes, not enough gray hair in this room, not enough gray hair in here to buy our knives. So
That's
it's
funny.
and it's kind of true that that first morning they hit, and it's it's all that the guys that run for the booth with more of the bench spades and stuff like that, and it's true that a lot of our collectors and people that buy our knives are usually older people, older gentlemen and older women, uh, and that instead of the younger crowd. And I wish we could get the younger crowd more interested in more traditional pattern knives. I'd like to see that happen.
Well, if you really want to reach the younger crowd, you need to start putting some butterfly knives on your table.
Yeah. I tried making one of those about 7 or 8 years ago, and that's it. It's still in pieces in a box somewhere on my table. So, yeah, that's a whole nother outfit there. Between them and automatics, it's they're interesting, and getting butterfly knives to work or something.
Well, I was just trying to get through Blade without getting stabbed. You go back over there where all those kids were flipping those butterfly knives.
Oh yeah. Those guys are something, man. You watch, uh, they're crazy, and
Yeah.
I guess yeah, that's all I can say. I watch them do that, and it's like, I'd end up, there wouldn't be enough band-aids around to patch me up after I tried that.
I definitely think from a knife perspective and getting the younger generation into it, some of the most influential things are Forge and Fire and these balisong competitions where they're doing like all the butterfly stuff and everything. So, I mean, I guess maybe as they mature and in their what they're looking for knives, that they might actually hit the slip joint and lockback crowd a little bit more. But especially if their parents pass down things from like their grandparents, because that's one thing that I didn't get any of my grandfather's knives that he bequeathed. He like they all went to my uncle. So mostly me getting into slip joints was to remember the fact that I grew up with pocket knives and especially old Barlows and single blade trappers and things, but to also remember my grandfather because he carried one around everywhere and had actually a pretty extensive slip joint collection in his shop.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, that's and like I said, of course that's the group I grew up with. We just everybody carried a traditional pocket knife. I mean, it was just and it was a tool. It wasn't people say, "Oh, are you carrying a weapon?" No, I'm not carrying a weapon. I'm carrying a tool. I use this thing daily for 100 different little projects. And even today, if you just put out hay for the cows, you got to cut hay string. So I'm out cutting hay string and stuff with my, with and so to us it's a tool. It's and now true, some of them we make now are very high end tools, and we decorate them up and create really really nice works of art. But it all stems back to that it's one of man's oldest tools. And um lost my train of thought, just went right out the window.
Yeah, it happens to us a lot.
And but so and that's something that's been missed today is that people say, well, you can't carry that, that's a weapon. No, we carry it, it's a tool. And I think that's the wrong thing it's been looked at.
Yeah, well, one thing I noticed about your knives, and it is I would say it's more common in Texas slip joint makers than I see anywhere else. But it's embellishments like file work and engraving and things. What made you decide to start getting your knives engraved and on your file work? What are the things that you like about file work specifically?
uh File work to me, I like doing file work. And uh the the greatest thing about file work is somebody picks the knife up off your table and they kind of turn it over to the spine and their eyes get kind of big and they smile or they just go, wow. And, that's, that's one of the main reasons I do it. We do it for the wow. Um, uh, it's great to when somebody picks up something that you've put hours and hours into, and and somebody picks up and it just lights them up, and that's worth it. How did I get started doing embellishments? It was, I'll tell you what, the first knife that I had engraved, I was scared to death. I said, I'm going to spend all this money on, Alice Carter. I can't say enough about Alice Carter. She's the greatest lady in the world, and a fantastic engraver. And she, of course, she does probably 95% of my engraving. And uh, luckily, she's only 7 or 8 miles from me, so that makes it nice too. We're real good friends. Other than she does a lot of work for me. But I decided to do the first one. I had a real pretty piece of dark blue black mammoth, and and some damasteel, and I built this knife. It looks really good, and I said, but I think I'm gonna have this one engraved, and finally broke down and had it done. And but I was scared to death. I thought I'd carry that knife around forever, because nobody's gonna want one of my knives at that kind of money that I'm going to ask for this knife. And uh, it sold just right away, and I was just tickled. And um, so it turned into now it's I try to do maybe 4 to 5 what I call big knives a year. Um, that are just as fully dressed out as they can be, and I try to keep most of my stuff as much Texas themed as possible. Bill Poor out of Abilene does. I buy a lot of steel from Bill. He's just a great guy, and he makes really good steel. And so all of my knives are pretty. There again, we're right back to it's all in Texas. And but just I really got into doing more art type knives as instead of the just. And I still make a lot of just everyday users. What I consider an everyday user, just a 4 1/4 single blade trapper. I still make a lot of those, but those real big dress knives are just and the collector pieces are just uh, I just it just uh, I don't know. It just excites me. And it's the collaboration with Alice and everything, and they just work out. And then I look back and I go, man, that turned out nice.
Well, I know you from doing Texas shows, and well, your reputation in the Texas Knife Makers Guild, doing shows locally, and then also in the time that I've been in the National Guild. But one thing that's always struck me as an impression that you leave on me is when you go to a show that you're at, you're always behind your table. You always have a smile on your face, and you're always standing up. Can you tell me a little bit more about like show etiquette and some of the like maybe some advice to makers on how to conduct themselves at shows? Because I've always been really impressed by you, and even though sometimes I don't have like money to buy your knives or whatever, I've always been compelled to just because of your posture and how you conduct yourself.
It's um 80% of the people that buy knives are and let's just be honest. What we do is they're more toward toys. We make absolutely nothing that anybody's got to have. They can go down and buy a case pocket knife at Walmart for a little bit of money and be happy. So um, we 80% of the people they buy the maker as much as they buy the knife. Now, true, you have to make a nice knife, but they will buy the maker instead of. And I had somebody tell me many years ago that if by the end of the day, if you're not totally wore out, then you didn't have a good day at the show. Because, like I said, I'm always standing. I talk to everybody, and I'm always to the point where, And people will say, well, I can't afford one of your knives. And I said, you can still pick it up and play with it. You can still pick it up and enjoy it. And even though, you may not be able to buy it, it may be out of your budget, but, and maybe I can do something that can meet your budget. But the fact is you can still see this and enjoy it and enjoy something that I made. Show etiquette is one of those. Is if you're not standing up talking to people, if you're just sitting behind your table with your arms crossed, people are going to walk right by you. I talk to everybody. Everybody that walks by the table is, hi, how you doing? What's going on? And I'm not really hawking the knives. I'm greeting everybody. And that's the main thing about being there. You know, be professional, be on your feet, and do a good, clean presentation. You're gonna, and some of the makers get kind of upset. Well, I got asked 100 times today where I buy my blades from. Eh, you answer every one of them is, I don't. I make every piece of the knife, and you may answer the same question 100 times in a day, but every time you answer it, you need to smile because that's another person. You just smile and you answer the question and be honest with them um, and be personable. Um, and that's what brings the people in. And yes, pretty knife sitting on a table is pretty knife sitting on a table, but there is much when they're going to invest the kind of money we're talking about that the knives we make. You have to make an impression on those people to have them pick you over somebody else.
That's some really good advice for someone like me who's going to be going for the first time as a, I guess I don't know if you'd say vendor or whatever, but it's kind of funny last year, and I've never done a knife show before. I've talked, I think on my podcast a little bit about this Batson Symposium, how they'd have like a little 2-hour knife show on Saturday afternoon, but that's the extent of it. But it's funny, last year walking around Blade, I thought, oh my goodness, if I get me a table, I was so wore out just from walking around. I thought if I get me a table, I won't be near as wore out. Excuse me. But taking your advice, it sounds like I need to be.
You will be if you do it right. You will be because you're on your feet all day long. You're engaging everybody all day long. And the energy. Um, the I did a small video uh, bit with Richard Steinberg from Bear Claw Knives out of Midland. He was walking around doing videos with several makers, and did a short one with me. And a guy called me and he says, I want to get one of your knives. And I go, oh, I appreciate it. And he goes, yeah. He said, I saw this video that was done, and he said, then your energy, just your energy and your passion, he said, makes me want to one of your knives. And that's what you're not there just, okay, I'm not just there selling widgets. I'm selling a part of me. Every one of those knives is a part of me. And I express that.
Yeah, kind of on that note, something, Chris, to think about with shows, and I hope this is helpful to listeners and makers who want to actually go and exhibit at shows, is the process of being part of the show is an exhausting one, right? But in addition with that, you have to pick up your displays. Like you have to cart everything from your rental or your car or wherever, right? And you have to take it to your table, and you have to set up. And some things you might take home or to your hotel room every day. Other things you might leave on the table. And I found over the years there's a process that works pretty well for me. But one item that is indispensable, regardless of whether you're packing slip joints or pocket knives in just something that you can carry easily or not, is if you have a display table and you have accoutrements that you want to take there, get you a little roller tote or something, because getting up and down the escalators and things is kind of a pain. And if you can put everything in a tote and carry it, then it'll be a lot easier and save some of your energy for actually interacting with customers and show goers.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh yeah, I carry way too much stuff to shows. and I have a I have a small two-wheel dolly and everything. My table cover, and then I have a cowhide that I put over my table cover, and that all goes in one box. And then I've got a box for my satchel with all my knives in it, and then I have a box that has all of my miscellaneous stuff that goes on my table, my little stands, my setup, my books, my pens, my stickers, all of that stuff. So I've got a two-wheel dolly that's stacked up about 3.5 feet high with stuff on it that I can wheel around. Having to tote that stuff in by hand would be just a killer. And that's a good if you're getting ready to do a show, first thing you do, and to new makers that's going to do your first show, is stage everything at the house first. It sets you out a board, 2 foot by 8 foot or something like that, and set your table up and look at it. And go, okay, do I need to take this? Do I need to take that? And get everything together that you think you're going to need, and get it packed up so that you can get it in and out. Because that's and especially setup day, especially if you're not going to get there the day before to set up. If you're going to get there early in the morning to set up, you need to have your act together, or you're going to be stumbling over yourself when the show starts.
That's some great advice. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, shows, especially if they start before noon, life comes at you fast, and especially like being in the guild or whatever, they'll do their guild meetings before the show, and so if you don't have things set up beforehand, then you have the guild show or whatever, or meetings or things like that, or even breakfast, and then you have to rush through everything in order to get it set up. So staging is a really good advice too. I hadn't thought about that, but I do it every show.
Yeah, I don't have to stage so much anymore. It's now is to get the knives ready and have them all double checked and stuff like that. I've done enough shows over the years that now anymore all of my stuff just stays packed. So all of my and about every second or third show I unload everything and then repack it so that make sure, okay, I'm short on this, I need some more of those, and have everything ready to go. Because and a good thing that nobody thinks of is a battery pack. Um, for your phone, or if you're going to use a tablet, or now I've actually got a picture frame that I put on my table that's loaded with a whole bunch of my pictures. I have my portfolio book, but I have a picture frame now that rotates through pictures, and I can run it off my the auxiliary battery pack. There's nothing worse than 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and your phone dies, and you're going to use it either to take a credit card or PayPal or something like that. Um, uh, you and then your phone's dead. A battery backup pack is just almost a necessity that a lot of folks don't think of carrying to a show.
Yeah, I agree. Wi-Fi in show, like a Blade show, is probably the example of this. But you have all of these makers packed into a single room, and to get on Wi-Fi, like you could pay, I don't know, what is it, like $50 a day or something like that for Wi-Fi if you need to take credit card transactions or whatever. But sometimes cell signal with all those cellulars in the room can be kind of difficult too. So thinking about the technology logistics, like how you're going to take cards, if you're going to have the internet connection that you need and everything, is important. We go through this every time. I'm like, do I have the proper internet connection that I need to take cards? I usually test it beforehand, make sure I have enough change for cash transactions and things. So all of that prep goes a long way in making sure that you spend less time worrying about those logistics of how you're going to sell if somebody comes to your table and wants to buy, and more time being able to just enjoy the experience and the customers and showgoers.
That's Yeah, and the main thing is to enjoy the people. Um, uh, Everybody that comes up to your table is a prospective buyer for one, and besides that is they're looking at something that you did, and if you can bring a smile to their face when they, like I said, the biggest thrill to me is when somebody picks up one of my knives, or either opens it or something like that, or just looks at it and just their eyes get big and they smile, and then that's that's the biggest thrill of the whole thing, is that you've just affected somebody else's attitude for the day, or at least for that moment, and that means a whole lot.
Yeah, something that's interesting too about shows, and with so many makers that sell online, like with the advent of the internet, the lack of guild shows and everything, and now we're kind of back to having syndicated knife shows, is the proximity to greatness that you have. And I'll tell you a story. So I had done some local shows, and then I decided to try to get a table at Blade Show Atlanta, and my table was really good, which I was surprised about. I wasn't in the side room; I was in the main room, and sitting behind me there was a knife maker who's older, and everybody was coming up and taking pictures with him and shaking his hand. And he sold, man, if he didn't sell every knife that day that he had originally brought, I'd be surprised. But my wife and I decided that we were going to have a candy table, or candy on the table, that we could, kind of give people refreshers and whatnot, draw them in to just talk and be engaged in what we were doing. And this guy and his wife started, picking off stuff from the table and everything, because they were older and they didn't have a chance to go to the food court and get stuff. Well, we started talking a little bit more, and that person that I was sitting behind was Steve Johnson of Loveless reputation, and it didn't take me long, but I was like, I see your knives everywhere. Like, I've grown up looking at your knives, seeing your logo, but I just never put a face to those blades. And I was like, I'm just like incredibly honored just to be sitting in proximity to you. And him and his wife and his son Nate were just the most enjoyable, genuine, loving people. And I still talk to Steve pretty often, but you get an opportunity at shows, unlike being on the internet, to really get to know people that you just would not be able to have the time with, because either they're retired or they spend their entire time doing their thing and their knives and living their life. And I've always just really enjoyed the show circuit because of that proximity to greatness. I get to meet amazing people.
That is one of the greatest things about doing shows, is um, it the it there people say, well, what is it about Blade Texas or Blade Atlanta? Why should I bother to go to Blade Texas, Blade Atlanta? It's because you will, if you like knives at all, you will just be, it'll just be sensory overload. You will just be blown away by the amount of talent in that room. And and like you said, and people don't realize that some of these, most of these guys, we're just all, it's just, we're just human, and we, I'm the same way. I get to meet people and my heroes, and it's just the greatest thing in the world.
No, I fully agree. Something that I think is interesting to talk about with you, Stanley, is you mentioned portfolios and pictures, and for makers, I I don't really know if a lot of us, starting out, think about how important it is to develop a portfolio. But can you talk a little bit more about, like, your photography, like getting your pictures taken and everything? Because if anybody follows you online, especially, you pretty prolifically get your knives photographed.
Oh yes, yes. That's one of the first things I'll tell a relatively new maker, or somebody that's making their uh, early in their knife making career, is get your knives professionally photographed. Professional photography does not cost; it pays. Um, Had my first knife photographed, Chuck Ward, when Chuck Ward was still doing photograph years ago. I had Chuck shoot up my first one, and my wife says, "You paid, I think it was 125 or $130 at the time, to have it professionally photographed, and of course you got an 8x10 print, and he always submitted to all the magazines." And she goes, "You spent that much money just to have a picture taken of your knife?" I go, "Yeah, I did." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Just because you need to, you need to have a record." And so then, I don't know, it was a couple of 3 months later, I went to the mailbox and there was a big envelope in there. Opened it up and it was a copy of Knives magazine back when it used to be the tabloid newspaper type magazine. And I go, "I don't remember ordering this." And there was a yellow sticky note on it. It says, "Your knife is on page number so and so." I literally floated back into the house. And but the neat thing is then I ended up getting 4 orders off of that magazine that went out, and 4 people called me and ordered knives from me because they saw that picture in that magazine. They'd have never known about me other than for that, other than they've taken that picture. And so, and building a portfolio that way, for one, you can see how your own work progresses over the years. But the second thing is people will stand at my table and they'll sit there and just go through my portfolio. "Oh wow, oh look at that one. Oh wow, that's and that's another part of the presentation you have to make. They're seeing another part of you through the pictures. So, and it doesn't matter who, Jim Cooper shoots a lot of my pictures, Eric Egley. I mean, there's several great photographers out there, but whoever you choose, but, uh, and realize that they're not just giving you a 8x10 for that money. You're getting submitted to all these magazines, which will get your stuff published. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, the first time Tim Robertson actually recommended I try getting some knives photographed, and in addition, I was at ICCE, so it was the first year that Blade Show took him over. I think it was in 2020? Yeah,
That was 2019 was when yeah.
Yeah, when did they change the name? It was 2020 that it turned over to
They
Blade
changed
Show.
the name to just Blade Texas, yeah.
Yeah.
ICCE Blade had ICCE in 2019. Was
Yeah.
their first year to have it.
I'm pretty sure it was 2020 that I went to get into the Texas Guild, and I took this old knife that was a pattern from my fixed blade mentor that I bought my shop from. That was originally a steak knife pattern that he made for his daughter's wedding, and I said, this looks like a really good Skinner blade, and so I named it my gentleman's Skinner. And it had ironwood handles that were like burled ironwood, and I put in some dovetailed nickel silver bolsters and gussied it up real nice. And in the inspection process, and then when I later went to the guild table, they were like, "Man, like this would look really good photographed, but it also look really great with a taper tag." And I was like, "Well, I can't really do anything about the taper tag at this point," but I went through and polished that up real well, made sure everything looked like as perfect as it could be, and I sent it off to Coop. And I think maybe I spent $197 after shipping and everything on it, but not long after, maybe like the next month, I was looking in Blade magazine because I had a subscription, and I saw that I had it's like the highlights that they have for new makers and other people like that. I found it published in the magazine, and that really made me ecstatic. I almost felt like I didn't deserve it because it was my first photograph that Coop had taken, but then it got published also in the yearly compilation that they have. And I'll tell you, even though it costs a decent amount of money and people might think that it's a little bit of a luxury spend, it really did spur me on to have like some of that validation, like to be published with some of your work and to have those records of it, it really did spur me on to continue going down this path that I was for knives. And I really encourage it for makers, at least to try it out and to be as habitual as you can, especially if you want to build a really good and beautiful portfolio.
Oh yeah, yeah. A portfolio is just, people say, well, well, you have the internet. Yeah, but the internet is not the same as when somebody sits there and just stomach through your pictures. Um, but and it will it will spur you on because, okay, that one looked really good in that picture. Now everyone you do from then on's got to look at least that good. You you can't back up. Excuse me.
That's true.
There's, that's kind of like the bigger art knives that I do now, and the ones, the ones that have won me the awards over the last couple of years. It's like, I go out to the shop. It's okay if I'm. It's like, okay, that one's going in the trash because it didn't make it, and I can't, I can't let that go anymore because I have to keep. You have to keep that level of not production, but that level of creativity, that level of excellence. Um, you know, my one of my heroes growing up was the coach of the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi, and he somebody asked him one time about why they practiced so hard, and Vince said that he said no one will ever achieve perfection. He said, but if we work hard enough, we can at least achieve excellence, and that's what we try for. Um, and if the day that you walk out to the shop and go, okay, I'm just going to knock one together to go out, that's the day you have to quit because it shows in your work.
So Stanley, we've talked a lot about different advice for makers, shows, photography, etiquette, and presence in shows. But if you can take your experience in knives and speak to makers and those knife enthusiasts, if there's some golden rule or advice that you would give somebody, what do you think that would be?
Uh, my advice to makers is, I guess, is to never be afraid to reach out to another maker to ask a question or an opinion, and never be don't be afraid to walk up to a maker, and especially another maker. If you're a starting out maker and you come to my table and you say, hey, would you look at one of my knives, I would be glad to, and I'll tell you everything that's wrong with it, and uh, but I'll tell you how to fix everything too. Uh, we we don't critique to tear down. We critique to improve. Um, um, and so uh, the younger makers is don't give up. Uh, all of us start. I keep my first knife on my table, and it's the ugliest thing in the world. I keep it in my shop with me. And I look back on it, and it's just I made it out of a file and some diamond wood, ugliest thing you ever saw in your life. And I was so proud of it at the time. And so none of us start out great. There's only one way to get good, and that's to do a bunch of it. So and never be afraid to ask questions. And so um, and if I can ever be a help to anybody, just reach out to me and let me know, and I'm always glad to help.
Stanley, kind of along the same lines that you're speaking of there about, reach out to other makers and ask them questions. I think it's just as important. You talk about your first knife, you keep that, and it reminds you of how far you come. I think as makers, it's important for us to be willing, and I think most of everybody I've talked to is, but to be willing to take the time with the younger makers and the people just getting into it. And I have I'm not going to mention his name, but there's a maker that does great work that's actually in the area. And this was about the time where I decided, all right, how serious am I going to get? Now, I just do knives still as a hobby, but, I want the work that I turn out, I want it to be good quality. And so about the time that I was really trying to decide which way I was going to go with that, I'd reached out to a guy and basically, I just needed somebody to help me with the finer points, like finish and embellishments and that kind of stuff. And the guy said he didn't teach people because you can't teach. What did he say? You can't teach skill or something. And it was kind of discouraging. And actually, it wasn't long after that when I reached out to Luke and some of those guys and got to go out and film them and see some of this stuff. But it really made an impression on me that I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy like you're talking about that's willing to help whoever comes along and asks. And there's, as a maker, there's a joy. There's a guy named Wesley Crum who lives not far from me and came by my shop a couple years ago, just never made a knife, just wanting to learn a little bit about it. And he's taken off and just does excellent work. And I find joy in, thinking that, hey, he came to my shop. That's the first place he came, and I showed him different tools and stuff. And then he took it and ran with it. And, but yeah, don't be afraid to ask somebody, but also, don't be a jerk when you get asked.
That's a big part of it. And and the thing too is, I'm pushing 70 already. If we do not get the younger guys interested in building knives, handmade knives, then the art form is going to go away. So we have to take the younger guys and get them. You know, yes, we could critique them. Yes, I pick on them, and we have a good time. But you have to have them interested and be passionate about it, because if not, before long, our art form will go away.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's important to note too, is that for knife makers who have figured it out, who know the fundamentals of knife making, something important to impart to other new knife makers is not just tips and tricks and things, but the mentality that goes into making good knives, right? Because something that I encountered on my knife making journey early on, in the age of the internet and whatnot, and not being impressed by anybody's shop, because I just didn't go to people's shops, is that there's lots of things that you can pick up on in researching making knives that will get you to make a knife shaped object, right? But making a really good looking knife takes a lot of finesse. It takes a lot of perspective and introspection, and pushing your concept of what you're trying to achieve, right? And I think that that's something that we have a responsibility to some extent as makers who have come before, to impress that on them, that it's okay to take constructive criticism on your knives. But remember, if you ask me honestly what I think about your knife, you have to be willing to accept that constructive criticism, because I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to help make you better. And people have done it for me, sometimes being brutally honest about my work, but I've always appreciated that level of honesty, because it's only made me a better knife maker.
Oh, absolutely. The most important thing in a knife shop is the want to. You have to have that want to. Um, you can have all the equipment in the world, uh, and 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 not make a decent knife, and then you can be like Lorcher, Wolfgang Lorcher, and have sandpaper and files and make some of the most beautiful stuff you've ever seen in your life. The main thing is the want to, and if you have the want to, then you'll find a way to make knives.
Yeah, well, Stanley, it's been really great having you on the show. I speak for everybody out there that you're a real interesting cat, and we'll go ahead and post up your social media online rather than you have to go through all of your Instagram, Facebook, and website and everything. So if anybody's interested in Stanley's work or talking to him, feel free to hit our links inside of the podcast show notes and what we post up on social media, and reach out to him. He's a gem and a wealth of information, and I've benefited from that as well. So thank you again, Stanley.
Thank y'all so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Stanley. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. We really appreciate both Chris and Stanley being here. Just remember that you are loved, and God bless.